So when we're looking at the presidency of William Taft, we're looking at it from the time that Roosevelt was nearing the end of his term. He had announced that he wasn't going to run for what essentially is going to be a third term, and so he was still extremely popular with the American people, and so he essentially handpicked a successor that had similar policies to himself. And so this was William Taft, and with Roosevelt's backing, Taft ran as a Republican nominee. He ran against William Jennings Bryan, who once again was nominated by the Democrats. Even though Bryan, pegged himself as a progressive, Taft easily defeated Bryan, 321 electoral votes to 162. As a sign of the times, the Socialist Party candidate Eugene Debs is going to gain about 420,000 votes, as far as the popular vote goes. So Roosevelt's when he is done as president, he's going to go on safari to Africa. It's going to be followed by not only the American newspapers and press, but by the American people. And when he comes back, he's just as popular as ever. And he comes back at the age of 51, so he's still relatively young. When Roosevelt goes to Africa, he leaves, and his time as president is over. We have with us the Roosevelt legacy. So what legacy did Roosevelt leave before we get into to Taft and his presidency? Remember, the legacy that Roosevelt left is that he wanted to tame capitalism. He wanted to tame that unbridled capitalism, that free-for-all capitalism. But he was not an enemy of the business. He just wanted to bring it under control. He wanted to seek some sort of middle ground between the leave me alones, capitalism types of pure capitalism, and the father knows best, where government controls people's lives. This is going to be key when we talk about Taft. Is that, remember, Roosevelt, when looking at trust and looking at businesses, he just wanted to regulate them, and he did think that there was some good trust and some bad trust. Other parts of Roosevelt's legacy is that he increased the power of the presidency. He initiated reforms. He proposed legislation. And that he also made the American public and the world recognize that the United States is a world power to be reckoned with. Harken back to the big stick diplomacy, the Great White Fleet, the dealings with Panama, the Roosevelt corollary. Once again, the United States is a deal to or a force to be reckoned with. So let's go back to Taft. Taft, the saying, I guess, with the election of 1908, that everybody loves a fat man, seems to fit with William Taft. Everybody seemed to like him, and he was a likable guy enough, but he lacked the fire and guts that Roosevelt possessed. He was content to keep the status quo rather than rocking the boat. And so by adopting this really passive attitudes towards Congress, this Congress is the insurgent Republicans, so it's that more progressive wing of the Republican Party, and the Democrats. They started to oppose him, and therefore Taft, by default, becomes an ally of those old guard types of Republicans. In fact, if you look at Taft's cabinet, not one member of Taft's cabinet was a member of Theodore Roosevelt's reformist wing of the Republican Party. Dollar diplomacy, real quick, just to mention this, it is different than in-your-face, big stick diplomacy like Roosevelt. Dollar diplomacy is a little bit sneakier. You substitute dollars for bullets. You want Wall Street to, or you want American businesses to gain power by investing in countries, namely in Latin America and the Caribbean. Looking at the presidency of William Taft, as far as a progressive standpoint goes, as a trust buster, Taft brought 90 suits against the trust during his 4 years of president, compared to Roosevelt in the 7 years. This is roughly about 2 times the number of antitrust suits that he's going to bring against the monopolies in the trust. A couple things though that we want to look at, that Taft, as the trust buster, he did overstep his bounds slightly in 1911 when Taft pressed antitrust action against J.P. Morgan's U.S. Steel Corporation. The U.S. Steel Corporation was one of the good trusts that Roosevelt had labeled, and by Taft bringing the antitrust suit against the U.S. Steel Corporation, not only angered J.P. Morgan, who thought he had his assurance from Roosevelt that his trust wouldn't be touched, but it also angered Roosevelt as well, because Roosevelt feels like Taft went against his policies and went against his word. Some other progressive legislation under Taft. Conservation. Taft was a dedicated conservationist. His contributions in the area of conservation were equaled or outdid Theodore Roosevelt's. He protected water power sites from private development. He passed things like the Mann-Elkins Act of 1910. This brings telegraph, telephone, and cable corporations under the control or under the watch of the Interstate Commerce Commission. Some other progressive legislation under Taft, the Postal Savings Bank System in 1910. This is allowing the post office to authorize, or was authorized to receive savings deposits from individuals and pay interest of 2% per year on such deposits. This had been a major populist idea. And so, Taft, in a sense, was a progressive president. However, there are some actions here that would once again pit William Taft in the old guard wing of the Republican Party, and cause this split between Taft and Roosevelt and the old guard and these insurgents that is eventually going to lead to Woodrow Wilson's election in 1912. The first event that caused the split in the Republican Party was the Payne-Aldrich tariff of 1909. Reducing the tariff, if you remember, ever since the 1907 panic, reducing the tariff had been a major issue, or was very high on the list for progressive reformers. And so you see in 1909 that the House of Representatives, it passed a moderate bill that would reduce tariff rates a little bit. But the Senate, when the bill got to the Senate, they tacked on so many additions as far as increasing the tariff, that when it was all said and done, the Payne-Aldrich tariff actually increased tariff rates, but not actually reduced them. Taft signs the Payne-Aldrich bill, the Payne-Aldrich tariff, in August, thus doing two things: betraying his campaign promises of lowering the tariff, and he further alienates the progressive wing of the Republican Party by deeming it one of the most important pieces of Republican legislation ever signed. And so the Payne-Aldrich tariff, the first step in splitting the Republican Party. The second controversy that happens during Taft's time as president was the Ballinger-Pinchot controversy in 1910. This is going to overshadow any success that Taft had in the areas of conservation. What was happening here is the Secretary of the Interior, Ballinger, he opened up public lands in Wyoming, Montana, and Alaska for corporate development. Ballinger was sharply criticized by Gifford Pinchot, the chief of the Agriculture Department, the Division of Forestry, and also a strong TR supporter. Remember, Gifford Pinchot and the Division of Forestry was doing more to conserve, American lands than TR was doing, or anybody else was doing in the early part of the 1900s. Gifford Pinchot, he criticizes Ballinger. Taft is going to actually take the side of his Secretary of the Interior. He's going to dismiss Pinchot on these narrow grounds of insubordination. And out of this dismissal of Pinchot, a storm of protest is going to rise up from conservationists and from Roosevelt's friends. The split in the GOP is going to be complete when Taft deserts progressives in their attack on the leading guard, and the speaker of the progressives were attacking the leading old guard Republican, the Speaker of the House, Joe Cannon. And when Taft deserts these progressive allies and takes the side of that old guard Speaker of the House, Joe Cannon, the split in the GOP is going to be complete. There's a definite progressive wing of the Republican Party, and there's a definite old guard or conservative wing of the Republican Party. This division is going to be further out, or this division is going to become more clear in 1910 when Roosevelt comes back into American politics. Roosevelt in 1910 is going to make a speech at Osawatomie, Kansas. And in the speech, this is going to be the culmination of what he's been doing for the last year. Roosevelt, was out of the country in 1909, but in the first half of 1910, he was out of the country in 1909 and in the first half of 1910. But the tariff and the conservation issues galvanized him to become more active. And so he's going to give this speech in Kansas that's going to shock old guard Republicans, is going to inspire the progressive wing of the Republican Party, and he's going to outline this new doctrine with his Osawatomie speech, a doctrine he likes to label New Nationalism. The New Nationalism of the Osawatomie speech is going to mark a new era in politics where old Republican or old guard Republicans are now on the defensive. We'll talk about New Nationalism, some of the tenets of New Nationalism, when we discuss the 1912 election. But just know that Roosevelt's Osawatomie speech is now going to make a clear split. Old guard Republicans are on the defensive, and now you have that insurgent progressive wing being led by Theodore Roosevelt. Republicans are going to start reeling. In 1910, in the midterm elections in 1910, the Republicans are going to lose badly to the Democrats, and you even see some a socialist or two being elected into the United States Congress. Looking at the Taft-Roosevelt split, we start to see this split happen begin in 1910 with New Nationalism. In 1911, the National Progressive Republican League was formed. And Robert Lafayette of Wisconsin, if you think back to that Wisconsin idea, the laboratory of democracy, the governor of Wisconsin was Robert Lafayette. He seemed to be its leading candidate for the Republican presidential nominee, but eventually he's going to be elbowed aside by Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt's going to become the progressive candidate, and in 1912, when the Republicans hold their national convention in Chicago, the old guard is going to give Taft the nominee for the Republican Party, and although Roosevelt had clearly had the majority of Republican votes, the old guard, still being dominant, still controlling the nominating process, is going to give that nominee to Taft. So now what are the progressive Republicans going to do? What are the people that are followers of Roosevelt's New Nationalism going to do? It's clear that they have the majority. It's clear that they have the energy, the momentum on their side. But Taft is going to be the Republican candidate. Do you support Taft, or do you split the Republican Party into two? The progressives choose to do the latter. The progressives are going to leave the party to form a third party, Theodore Roosevelt's Progressive Party, or what's going to be known as the Bull Moose Party. And this is going to set up the election of 1912. Roosevelt's going to be running under his New Nationalism agenda, and he's going to be the candidate of the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Party. Taft is going to be the candidate under the Old Guard Republican Party, who is pretty much out of the game. They've been losing ground ever since 1910. And Woodrow Wilson's going to be nominated by the Democrats, and he's going to have his own progressive agenda that he's going to label New Freedom. New Freedom is attacking the triple wall of privilege, the trust, the tariff, and the banks. You also see the Socialist Party with Eugene Debs gaining close to 1 million votes. And we're going to look at the next video, the election of 1912, what each candidate stood for, the results of the election of 1912, and Woodrow Wilson's presidency as far as domestic